Joined us. This is the Plan Commission hearing for, what is it, December 9th, right? 2020. This hearing is not a continuation. It's a continuation of our comp plan amendments for the remanded comp plan Z19-502 from the City Council. After that, we do have a second hearing item for receivership code text amendment. But jumping into the first comp plan, let's take a roll call for the hearing, please.
All right, Michael Baker.
Here.
Ed Byerler.
Here.
John Dietzman.
Here.
Greg Francis.
Here.
Diana Painter.
Here.
Thomas Sanderson.
Here.
Sylvia St. Clair. Carol Schultz. She's here. Can you hear us, Mr. Reader? Looks like he's having some connectivity issues. So he's here. Joanne Wright.
Here.
And we have a forum.
And Jackie, just in here, Mary Winkus is also present.
Thank you.
As a non-voting member for the hearing, but a very important community liaison member of this council, the commission. So thank you. Okay, so I'm going to quickly go through some hearing procedures. In the online format, we will take public testimony on this tonight. We're going to impose a time limit of 3 minutes per individual. We ask if you've already submitted written testimony, please just summarize that. You don't have to repeat everything on there. That is equally part of the record. And then if you have redundancy as part of a group, again, please, you're welcome to, of course, sign in and ask for recognition. But again, please don't be too repetitive. All persons or commission members shall wait to be recognized by the president before speaking. Let's see. And I stated that oral, written, and email comments are all entered in the public record. At the end of the public testimony, we will close the record and then go into a motion and deliberation by the commission. I think that probably will be okay. With the commission here, unlike council, we invite the public either through the WebEx feature or I believe there's a dial-in. So if you're on the dial-in, we'll open up the mics, or if you're willing to testify, put in *3. Jackie, did we have a sign-in earlier, either via email or a form?
Yes, we do. We had 2 people sign up.
Okay.
Carol Tomsick and Bonnie Abernathy.
Okay, thank you. So we'll take in that order, and then if anyone else has joined, please do whatever you can to get our attention, either by the chat feature or we'll pause and at the time let people try to *3 in or open their mic. Okay, I think that's good for now on the rules. So in a hearing, we will first have a member of staff, in this case Kevin Freebot, introduce what we're doing today. And then the applicant or the representative for the applicant has an opportunity to speak. And then we'll go through public testimony, and then the applicant has an opportunity to rebut anything presented by the public before we close the record. So with that, I think we'll turn it over to Mr. Kevin Freebot.
There we go. Thank you, sir. Give me 1 second here to get set up. Thank you, Plan Commission President, Plan Commission members. I'm pleased to be here tonight to talk to you about file number C19502 COMP. That is the 29th and Ray Comprehensive Plan Amendment. As you know, it went to City Council, but it's been remanded back with a question. And so I'd like to just very quickly present to you and to the public watching the particulars of that, and then I'll step away and I'll be available for questions if you have them. Again, the application's 502 COMP. This was one of our applications this year to amend the comprehensive plan. In the overall application concerned 4 parcels, but the remand only applies to 2. Those 2 parcels are the ones on the east side of Ray Street. You see them here. Let's see if I can get my laser pointer working. There we go. They are on the northeast corner of 29th and Ray. This is in the Lincoln Heights neighborhood. Just a quick note, the house that you see on this property doesn't exist. It's been removed or it was demolished with a permit before the application was submitted. My photograph is just out of date. So someday soon, I will have up-to-date photos. Just a quick note that there is an alley to the north that is unimproved. It is not a part of this proposal. The original proposal that you heard earlier this fall concerns these parcels changing from a land use plan map designation of residential 4 to 10 units per acre and changing that to office with an attendant zoning change from RSF, which is residential single family, to O35, which is office with a 35-foot height limit. In November, when Plan Commission held a hearing on this application, you recommended to City Council that they approve the parcels west of Ray, but they deny the parcels east of Ray because of inconsistency with policy LU 1.5, which is the policy that sets where office uses may be placed in the city. Since that date, Council held a hearing on November 23rd. Asking or taking public comment and considering this. There was some general statements from council supporting the west parcels. They did have some questions regarding the east parcel, some concerns about it, or about those 2 parcels. And during their action on this application, they remanded this application back to Plan Commission with a question that they wanted to request that Neighborhood Council provide input and that the Plan Commission consider their input for the possibility of these 2 parcels being multifamily instead of office. And I'll show you what that looks like. This is back to our existing and proposed land use map. And here you see the 2 parcels we're talking about in red. The modification would, instead of being make those office in the future, it would make them residential 15 to 30. And again, we're only talking about the eastern 2 parcels. And then, of course, zoning would be different as well. For these 2 parcels, the zoning would change to RMF, residential multifamily. Just kind of looking at the 2 policies involved very quickly, they're largely similar. They both direct either higher density residential or office uses to centers and corridors. That they generally limit these uses outside centers and corridors. And then they both include some minor exceptions to the policy where these uses may be placed outside centers and corridors. They tend to follow the idea of existing boundaries or the trend if it's having to do with office. And the existing use have to be predominantly multifamily where they're talking about multifamily. So we did ask for public input on this possible modification. The Lincoln Heights Neighborhood Council has submitted a letter, which you've been given. And we've also received 5 separate public comments in written public comments that you've been provided as well. So since since this morning when we send you the last email we received, we haven't received any additional comments. At this time, as Plan Commission President said, it's customary to give the applicant time to speak. But before Mr. Hume comes up and speaks to you, I wonder if there's any questions that I can answer from the Plan Commission.
This is Todd again. Just for transparency, so everyone knows, we also have, as a commission, have been workshopping this for the last hour and a half. So,
great.
Commissioner Francis, please.
Yes, I have one question, Kevin. The west parcels, based upon our actions today, does that change anything on the 2 west parcels, or are our actions independent of that?
City Council's request to you was specifically about the eastern parcels, not the west parcels. I don't believe there's anything that would prevent you from changing them or from suggesting a modification, but their specific question only concerned the 2 eastern parcels.
Okay, thank you.
Great. At this time, I'd like to step back and allow Mr. Hume to speak if you'd like to.
Thank you, Kevin. This is Dwight Hume. As Kevin explained, we're now focusing on the possibility of multifamily for the easterly parcel located at the corner of Ray and 29th. And as you've seen in the description of policy, LU 1.4, it's allowed if it's in the vicinity of, in the vicinity of multifamily. Obviously, it's not unless you define vicinity as not adjoining, in which case there is multifamily to the west, to the north. But I would also point out to you that your zoning code allows multifamily zones designated and zoned properties to have office use by conditional use. And setting aside whether or not this ever becomes a CUP approved office site, and I'm not saying that that's necessarily what will happen, but it could happen under the multifamily zone. You would then have to, I think, use a little bit more liberal interpretation of the proximity of these offices that are located on the northwest corner of 29th and Ray and on the southwest corner of 29th and Ray, and consider that as one of the uses that otherwise is allowed in multifamily, and therefore this fits the equation of being akin to what the other land uses are. In this case, office versus multifamily. Turning to the idea of multifamilies as a category, it certainly is something that is residential rather than office. Office is going to have to be a conditional use permit and its own hearing, its own notifications, and its own decision by the hearing examiner, not the planning commission or the council. So some of the concerns that have been expressed of recent of this request talk about height restrictions. I think you've seen in the workshop that the single family zone is a 35-foot height limitation. And so is this, and so is office. So height is not a factor. One of the other aspects of this that we have dealt with in terms of market demand is from the office on the southwest corner. They would like this simply as an adjunct to an accessory parking area to their small parking lot that they have. If you compare in the aerial photo that's before you, the southwest corner site with office and parking is smaller than this particular site. So is this site large enough for office? Yes, it is. This issue about a hard boundary, we can't dispute that. That was concluded by the Lincoln Heights Neighborhood Council. But what is ignored again and again and again is market forces. The reasonableness of single family use on this site is not there. And the fact that multiple sites have been granted non-residential use on the east side of Ray. I've said it before to this body and to the council. You've got daycares and churches and fire stations, all issues and special permitted issues within the single family zone, and nothing has been adversely affected thereby. If this was to be a multifamily designation in the comp plan, it's not an office designation. It's a multifamily. And therefore, it is not a violation of your office category going to the east side of Ray. Those are my points. I appreciate the opportunity for this second consideration by the council and for your time to look at it. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Hume. Any commissioner questions? Okay, Kevin, anything else?
No, sir. That's it for me.
Okay,
I'm still here for questions if Plan Commission has them.
okay, thank you. Okay, with that, then I think we can move back into public testimony. So Jackie, I'll leave it to you, please, to remind us who we have signed up.
Okay, the first person who is signed up is Carol Tomsick.
Okay, Carol, please please join us, and again, please speak up to 3 minutes, and I'll give you a polite reminder if we get close.
Okay, sounds good. I am adamantly against the modified multifamily zoning by City Council and steadfast against the office zoning. Our neighborhood did not go through a year-long process to fight an office zoning in a residential neighborhood to have the partials on the east side of Ray Street modified to multifamily and erroneously grant the applicant an office zoning. In the briefing papers, it says offices can be developed in multi-residential zones. A multifamily zoning also allows a medical center, a detention center, essential public facilities, and rail lines and utility corridors. Multifamily does not sound residential to me. The briefing papers also say a future permit for office use in this location is likely possible if rezoned to multifamily. I want our neighborhood to remain residential. The city staff report states the subject properties have been historically residential since 1958. The area is not in the center of corridor. LU 1.4 states multifamily should be predominantly high-density residential. The parcels on Ray Street are surrounded on 3 sides by single-family residences. The proposed modified zoning of the parcels east of Ray Street go against the city's land use chapter in the comprehensive plan. The east side of Ray Street is a historically designated residential buffer. Multifamily zones are more intensive than single-family and two-family zones. LU 3.2 vision and value states the city values protecting the character of single-family neighborhoods. LU 3.3 states as a goal and policy, established single-family residential neighborhoods will remain largely unchanged. A less dense zoning such as residential single-family compact and residential 4-10 would complement the single-family residence. I live, work, and walk in the neighborhood. I walk south on Ray Street. The area is commercial on the west side. It is residential on the east side. I walk east on 29th after crossing Ray and 29th and feel like I am in a residential neighborhood. The street is lined with single-family residents. A multifamily zoning is not appropriate for the partials. The increased traffic would be a safety concern. The residential neighborhood lacks sidewalks and paved roads. There is also no on-street parking on the corner of Ray and 29th. Please deny the modified proposal by City Council and protect our residential neighborhoods.
Okay, thank you. Jackie, can you help me, please?
Yeah, and the next person who signed up was Bonnie Abernethy.
Thank you. I don't see anyone on WebEx or on the phone, right? Are there any phone numbers that I'm not seeing here?
I don't see any either.
Okay. Okay. Then moving on. Anyone else that would like to give public testimony? Am I correct? We only see WebEx participants today, right?
Right.
Yeah, I don't see any call-in users.
No.
Okay. Well, unless there are objections, then we will close the record. And then, Mr. Hume, was there anything you'd like to rebut from the testimony?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. The thought I have about policy language in the adopted plan, yes, it's there. It shows the intent, but it's becoming increasingly frustrating to watch the minds of the planning commission or decision makers. I don't mean you guys to be singled out, to be usurped of your common sense and reasoning. And I would trust that you would look at this, and I think you have a little bit in your workshop session by some of the nature of your questions. This is not a single family site. And we've been 15 months in the wilderness waiting for an answer, and we really appreciate the opportunity to get to this point. Our client is willing, as a last resort, if there was a development agreement, to restrict this to multifamily only versus office. They would at least accept that. But my argument professionally as a planner is that you're not taking the land use category of office to the east side of Ray, and therefore you're not violating the intent of policy language about where offices go. And that's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hume. Okay, I guess let's entertain a motion then on this, please.
Okay, here we go. I'd like to move that the Planning Commission amend our original recommendation to City Council regarding Comprehensive Plan Amendment Z19-502 comp to recommend rezoning parcels 35273.0219 and 35273.0220 to residential multifamily and residential 15-30.
Second.
Okay, moved by Commissioner Francis, seconded by Commissioner Baker. So thank you for that. That was consistent with our process before, motion for approval. So we can deliberate and approve or deny. And again, just as a background, as we've gone through this process, if we don't have a vote for approval, we would make a secondary motion for denial based off of, is that how we want to approach it? Based off of some justification. So we can document that. Okay, so, okay, deliberation. Anyone like to start?
I'll start.
Thank you.
I think from a practical standpoint that no one is going to build single family homes on the parcels under question. They're just not going to. The traffic both on Ray and 29th is horrendous. And I just don't think that it's going to ever be practical to put a single family home on that property. I think multifamily, as opposed to office, has some potential.
I support Michael's statement and Greg's motion. It seems like it would be, dangerous and noisy, and there's reasons why, practical reasons why a single family wouldn't be an attractive use there.
Thank you.
I think to the situation we had on 10th Avenue, I don't think we should approve this because this would be arbitrary compared to what we decided for the 10th Avenue property.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, of course, please.
Well, I have the same issue with this that we did with, the office uses. I mean, the policy states, what it does, and there is no policy support for this as much as I'd like there to be. I know Mr. Hume is saying that all of our common sense and reasoning has been usurped, and that could be true. But what our job is to look at policy and make sure that it's being upheld. And I wish there was some way to be taking a larger look at these types of parcels. This is in a sea of single family. If you look at the map that was given to us by staff, it goes for, I think, 12 straight blocks, and there's not one single parcel that is not single family on the east side of Ray. And this would be this tiny little speck. It's almost like spot zoning, but not quite. But yeah, I wish I could find some sort of policy support for this, but I just don't, any more than we did for the office uses. And so I believe that they would have the ability in single family zone to do a medical office there. But other than that, I mean, that's just my opinion. I just can't, as much as I would like to, and I can sympathize with this. And I wish there was some way to take a larger look from a citywide standpoint at all these different parcels, rather than us going through this process every time something like this comes up to try and find some way to not follow the policy, because it's our job to follow policy. So that's my stand.
Well, Joanne, I think your argument has really strong merit, but historically, and again, this isn't policy, but historically, you know, you would often find, am I on?
Yes.
Oh, you would often find, you know, a residential, I mean, like a commercial, like a mom and pop use in a residential zone, or a corner tavern or something like that, that because it's on the corner, you know, there's precedent historically, if not policy wise.
Well, I agree that there was, and you know, that was the traditional way things were built clear back when. But you know, when the comprehensive plan was adopted, many hours of conversation went on about center and corridor zoning and commercial uses, office uses, higher density resolution uses should be directed towards those centers and corridors. The whole idea was to make sure that they were successful and profitable, instead of having business as usual with this development going on everywhere, at every single intersection and a strip development. And so I'm just keep going back to what the comprehensive plan, the intent of it. And what it doesn't, I mean, Mr. Hume is right. What it doesn't address is these types of situations. And, you know, how to get around that, I don't know. But if you start making an exception to this piece of property, you know, what's next? And what's the criteria for an exception? You know, we really don't have a policy to address this type of situation.
I have a comment.
Yeah, please, Mr. Eastman.
Going back to the one of the basic philosophies of our comprehensive plan is that we should have centers and corridors, and we'll talk specifically to centers, that have a transition zone surrounded by multifamily, two-family, and then residential. And in this case, we have CC zones that are adequately covered with multifamily directly adjoining those CC zones. This one is outside of that, and the guidance is a little bit fuzzy, but it seems like it does not meet that general philosophy, and it doesn't meet the specifics either. And I even question the allegation that it's not useful as single-family residential, because it does have residential on three sides. Across the street is the same sort of corner, no different, and it's residential. And those buildings have not been, they've been able to sell and roll over. There's been a market for those, I'm sure. They haven't all been torn down and you know, with efforts to put those into commercial. So I think there's an argument that says, let's go ahead and honor the strong feelings of the neighborhood to keep this plot residential, and that's the way I'm going to vote.
I have a question that on those ones that are across the street to the south, are those still single family use, or have any of them been converted to multifamily? Because Todd made that comment earlier on about one of the photos that there were a lot of cars in the back of those residences. Anyone know?
The current zoning of those is still single family.
So there's no conversion allowed to multifamily under those circumstances?
I'm not sure what individual properties may have used.
They probably don't want us asking in a public forum, huh?
If I could speak to that only because of my everyday experience in that corner.
Please.
Those are really big homes. They're very tall. They're multi-level with I believe daylight basements. So I would not be surprised if they just have 10 people living in each home. That's why you see so many cars.
You know, it's an interesting discussion because maybe there's another way to approach it without being specific about any one property, but to talk about the trends, right? Because I agree. I've struggled with this a lot since our last hearing, thinking about after I watched the council deliberate and have split votes on recommendations we made. And what occurred to me, and I shared this in an earlier meeting, was, you know, we were rigid when and made a motion to approve each one of them and then discussed approval or denial of the main motion. And then when we often had a split vote and we're not able to approve it, then we gave justification for the denial. And sometimes that denial was a 9-0 vote based off that very narrow interpretation, as Joanne's talking about, you know, 1.4 or whatever the relevant one is. But it to me, it lost the bigger narrative of our deliberation and workshopping and so forth, you know, to the complexity of it. And I guess the question for everyone I have is, an honest question is, you know, if this was calling balls and strikes, then shouldn't the process be over the counter with ultimate, you know, authority going to the hearings examiner, which is what would happen if we did multifamily and the conditional use was still on the play. It's still there's still that process that's there. It's just not through for Mr. Hume's point, not through the commission or through the council. But then the second part is, you know, we have this year-long process for comp plan amendments, changing a map, because it should be hard. It should be deliberate, but also it should deal with the complexity, right? If it's a well-defined problem, it should just be the umpire calling balls and strikes. And so I think when I look at it, yes, if you go to 1.4, right, we can interpret that directly, but also when we go to 3.2 and start to get into the definitions and intent of those other of district centers. I'm sorry, this is a district center. You know, then I think we're going to find things that aren't in agreement, right? And we have to make that interpretation. So that's where my mind is right now, thinking more about what the intent of 3.2 is and the definition of a district center, where it definitely encourages multifamily in the proximity of this area. And I have questions on, yes, across the street is office, but multifamily is allowed, and I believe maybe even built in that. Maybe not. Maybe I might be wrong on that. It might only be in the multifamily. But so if you blurred your eyes on those two things, that could be solid multifamily up to Regal. I'll stop there.
I think I have a comment. I am pretty conflicted here. I don't think that the request is complying with the comp plan. I don't think it's fully in alignment with the comp plan. I get what you're saying about 3.2 and district center, but the district center is, you know, really ends at Fisk, and between Fisk and Ray is really that transitional zoning with a mixture of residential, multifamily, and office. When the Lincoln Heights district plan or district center plan was done a couple of years ago, as I recall, the plan ended at Ray, and it never extended past Ray east. That said, and so from that perspective, I don't think that this should go forward. At the same time, we have a serious issue, I think, with residential single family and the whole concept of residential single family and the exclusionary policies that it ultimately creates. And we have to address that. But I don't think that can be addressed 2 parcels by 2 parcels. I think that needs to be addressed in a more broader context that really requires some rethinking of land use 1.3 and what that means for us and what residential single family ultimately is. I have problems with the idea of going from residential single family to residential multifamily. Just with the idea that as soon as it transitions or as soon as it crosses Ray, I think you're going to start to see an uptick in requests to change to residential multifamily. Now, I'd be happy to entertain switching it to residential 2-family as creating a bit of a buffer, but I don't think I can support the move to residential multifamily. Thank you.
Hey, Greg, before we, I sense maybe you're on the verge of making a motion on that. Before we would entertain that, last point I'd like to throw out there is, I appreciate the neighborhood's input. That was the point. And so with thanks for all of the effort of the neighborhood and the neighbors, I make a separation between capital N and small n. Through the process of the planning, we haven't formally gone through sub-area planning, by the way, on this. So that is another option to say this needs to be thrown to sub-area. And correct me if I'm wrong, anyone from staff, if I'm out of line there. But I'm going to paraphrase. I referenced earlier, I got to participate interviewing apparently one of our new hires in the city, and I'm not going to say it's exactly the way she did, but she was commenting in her process of working with neighborhoods how it was very stressful for her. She took it was a lot of weight, but she knew the importance and made sure she followed up on every email and so forth. And then one of the comments was, the neighborhood is very invested, and so we expect that they would be part of the planning process and show up at public hearings. And if I can give a little constructive criticism back, all the arguments were fully expected, right? They're not anything different than we would expect from, a single family property owner, who's arguing for single family zoning. And I don't mean that to be too critical, but I do mean to say that what's missing here is a voice for those that can't show up to a public hearing, either because, obvious reasons, they're working, so forth, but those that aren't even part of the neighborhood yet. As we do future growth in this city, somebody needs to represent those future residences that are going to be part of the neighborhood center as we grow it and so forth. And I think part of our role as commissioner, I've been struggling with this, is to represent the neighborhoods, but I think that's there. It's also to represent a comprehensive look at the comprehensive plan and be able to represent, consistent policy and growth across our city. So in that sense, I'm going to support this change to multifamily because I think there needs to be a voice for where the trend is going and needs to go in our city. And I fully, I've discussed my concern on LU 1.2 to L 1.6 or 1.1 to 1.6 on, using terms like single family and neighborhood character as really being almost, being exclusionary. And I think the trend is going to be either requirement in our GMA or otherwise that's going to start to shift away. So I think we have to be careful on a long-term decision, but I think I'll support this as moving with the trends of the neighborhood and trends of our comprehensive plan interpretation.
So to counter that, I guess, a little bit is that the issue with me with residential multifamily is that residential multifamily rarely offers the opportunity for ownership. And whereas middle housing and lower down to, single detached homes do offer more opportunity for ownership. And I'm sure there's scenarios where residential multifamily can offer ownership opportunities, but that generally is the exception rather than the rule. And so I do think we need to densify. I do think we need to provide more housing options. I just think it needs to be done in a larger context.
If I could as well. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, well, I just agree with what Greg just said, and we talk about a comprehensive look. This is changing this parcel is not a comprehensive look. I mean, I would agree with what Greg had to say. I think there should be a deeper look at this, different areas of the city and what to do in our single family zones, rather than us parcel by parcel making these types of decisions. I mean, it's not up to us to really be doing that. It's up to us to be talking about policy. So we really need to be talking about changing our policy. So that's all I have to say.
If I could.
Yes, Tom, please.
Thank you. I don't want to sound contradictory to you, Todd, but and what your points very well taken. But I'm wondering if using our current methods, our current tools, are what is needed when you're speaking for the future. Because I don't really, in my opinion, as the new guy on the block, I don't really think these tools were put in the toolbox with the full understanding of where we were going to be right now and in the future. So to follow up on what Greg was saying, I would really like to see something done here beyond single family, but that's not an option for us right now, according to the plan. And also, on a slightly different point, since I have everyone's ear, the fact that this was remanded back to us to look at again, I think it sort of bypassed the view and the opportunity for the neighbors to really say something more. As much as I appreciate Lincoln Heights Neighborhood Council getting involved and making their statement, and Carol, of course, coming up and saying something, I really think that any changes on this corner have always been fought. So it needs a little bit more than just our opinion, in my. And that's all I really have to say. Thank you.
I agree with Greg that I think we need to look at a comprehensive review of the single family housing programs across the city. But in this case, from a practical standpoint, I just don't see a $300,000 plus home going in on this corner. And that's the average price of a home right now in Spokane. I do think that this particular piece, if we're looking at just this piece of property, could support a duplex or a triplex. And I agree with Greg on that standpoint.
Question. I have a question.
Oh, yeah, please.
Didn't Terrell say that a duplex was available to somebody in single family? That doesn't need any kind of change, right? Did I get that correct?
That was, are you going to answer this? This is Terrell. I said attached single family.
Right. So you could do a duplex, right?
Attached single family.
You're talking subdivisions and.
Yeah, they have to be on their own lot.
Subdivisions,
so
lines. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, you could do, basically it's the same as a duplex, but they each have to be on their own lot.
Okay.
There are two parcels here, which is why that's possible.
So that's possible without any change in the designation, right?
Correct.
Okay.
And it's big enough for pocket residential, like I think, right?
Yeah, it has to be, I think, over 8,000 square feet to do pocket, all of those different development options. Yeah, what was the size of this? I think on an 8,600 square foot lot, you could do, you could subdivide that. You have to go through a subdivision process, and you might even be able to get 4 units on here if it's big enough. They would be all townhouses basically, or 2 attached units twice.
So there are some options already, right?
Yeah. Okay, so last point I'll make, and we're probably getting pretty deep into rewriting our comp plan here, but I think it's a healthy discussion. My viewpoint and why I'm going to support this is, our LUs 1.3 through 1.6, there are some big gaps in there, and it's not just our comp plan, right? Our comp plan is a dated document, and that's why we update it periodically. But the GMA has holes in it, and that's recognized that GMA doesn't fully capture environmental considerations, climate change, carbon, all this stuff that's coming at us, right? So that's one point. There's holes in this, so it's already open to interpretation on arguments of why you would do density. That's my point. The second piece is it doesn't, we talked earlier in the workshop about within a quarter mile, other ordinances and other actions are being taken in the city based off that quarter mile to a center. So I think that heavily influences me. And I do think, Cliff, I think you had a valid point, but I also would argue that this is different than the 10th Avenue proposal because it is directly adjacent to higher density. It's not isolated and away from the center and corridor. So anyway, I'd put that out there and then ultimately we need to decide and to interpret, on the single family issue, whether or not it is balls and strikes or it's going to be, something we need to interpret with a 2020 lens, not a 19. Help me out, Lewis, and what's our comp plan again? GMA is 1991. What's this? 98?
Most of the plan was adopted into policy in the 2001, and was talked about by the community for several years prior to that.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to get so specific. It's just saying that this, is a 20-year-old, backbone to this document.
Well, I agree that we need to increase density. I think we need to have better land use. We need to, from an environmental perspective, from lots of different perspectives. With that said, if there's an interest in switching this to residential 2-family, RTF, which would directly allow for duplexes on it, then I'd be willing to make that motion if there's some interest there.
Greg, I would support that motion if you made that.
I would too.
I would too.
I would too, Greg.
Okay. I would like to amend the existing motion to recommend changing the parcels to RTF instead of RMF.
Second also accepts that.
Okay, was that Tom seconding? That was Greg motion, Tom second. Okay.
No, it was Mike seconding. I seconded the initial motion.
Oh, Michael, thank you. Yeah, okay.
So can I weigh in on this a little bit?
Yes, please.
Had a chance to talk about this new proposal.
I think can we mute everyone except for Joanne? Are you speaking right now?
So this is, something brand new that nobody's had a chance to weigh in on. The neighborhood hasn't had a chance to look at this or anything else. and to comment on it or send letters or testify. And so I don't know if it's a little late in the game to be making these kind of changes, but wouldn't this have to go back then to the community and go through a process?
It's an important point, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask, because it doesn't seem that that was the option, one of the options given to the Plan Commission.
Maybe the staff weigh in on that.
Tim Richmond here. Residential uses on the property is within the scope of things that have been under consideration all along, because office allows residential use, and this is a lower density residential use than allowed under the office designation that's been studied for the last several months. So I think that it's fine, especially since the city council is going to have an additional hearing on the matter anyway.
But the issue would be changing it from single family to duplex, which is different. It would be like changing it to any other zone. So it's
yes, but for the last year we've been considering changing it from single family to office, and higher density residential uses are allowed under the office designation. So I think higher density residential use has always been within the scope of possible uses of the property based on the application.
Yeah, the RTF zone allows for duplexes. It would also allow for townhouses to be built, attached units on their own lot on this site, probably up to 6 to 8 of them.
to be like a. And then what about office uses?
RTF doesn't allow for office use.
Okay.
No conditional use application. Yeah.
Correct.
That's correct. The conditional use permit allowance for office is only RMF and RHD, so it would not apply.
And then the other thing we talked about in the workshop was it would also then exclude multi-story flats, apartments. Right.
Yeah, you couldn't do an apartment building. It would have to be either duplexes or townhouses. It is still open to our other alternative forms, such as the pocket residential. But those would all be, they couldn't be stacked units either.
From a practical standpoint, I think the multi-use aspect of it makes a lot of sense.
Michael, is that in defense of multifamily rather than two-family?
Well, I would suggest it would be 2 to 8 family.
So the residential multifamily. Yeah.
Well, I don't know how to word it exactly, but I think that we would want to have it a residential duplex or a 4-plex or an 8-plex. It also could fit into the actual sale of the properties.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, Michael. Now we're going through math, right? 10 to 20 would be the residential two-family versus 15 to 30, right? So the question is if you win R2F and your motivation was multifamily, not any other conditional use, could you still get a pretty high density on this lot with a 10 to 20? I think you probably could, but haven't gone through that exercise, right? Now we're designing a project, right?
Yeah.
It just seems like you could gain 2 duplexes with a simple boundary line adjustment, and you could fully utilize those 2 properties with RTF. While to me, the benefit of that option versus the RMF is that it provides more options for ownership than rental.
I agree with that, Greg.
And it preserves the neighborhood aspect of the property. It's not an office. It's not a high-rise apartment. And as Mr. Hume said, they have no intention now. If they got the multifamily, they would be willing to write a development agreement that would exclude office. So it seems like it would meet the owner's needs also to have a commercially viable development. Seems like a good solution.
Does staff have an opinion about this?
Staff thinks that the commission's having a very good discussion.
Very political. So it's definitely a compromise solution, right? And I don't think it's going to make the applicant necessarily happy, but it probably gives a little more market, a few more market options. So I think I will not support the amendment, but ultimately if it came back to the main motion and that's what passed as amendment, I would support it.
Is discussion wrapping up?
I would call
Okay.
for a vote on the amendment.
So let's call for should we do it by voice on the amendment to amend a motion from a residential multifamily to residential two-family? Okay, so let's try this. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Okay, any opposed, nay, including me, nay.
I'm showing Greg is having a little difficulty. Greg, are you there?
Abstain.
Can you hear me?
Okay. Okay, so I heard all ayes except for a nay from me and an abstention from Sylvia. Is that correct?
I abstain. Sylvia abstains.
No,
Okay, thank you.
I was an A on that.
Joanne?
Right.
Okay,
Maybe
so
you should do a roll call.
okay, let's do a roll call. Please.
All right. All right, Michael Baker.
Aye.
Todd Byrather.
Nay.
John Dietzman.
Aye.
Greg Francis.
Aye.
Anna
Aye.
Thomas Anderson.
Aye.
Sylvia St. Clair.
Abstain.
Clifford Winger.
Aye.
And Joanne Wright.
Nay.
Okay, so motion carries.
Okay. So I think that's where we are. Are there any other comments then, or do you want to go into the main motion?
I just wanted to comment on my nay, and the reason behind it is
Sure, please.
I just haven't had enough time to really take a look at this and what the implications would be. And so that's my whole reasoning. You make all the sense in the world, but I don't know that. So.
And Joanne, just to ask your opinion, I believe you're also not in support of the main motion though, right?
Right.
Okay. So, okay. Okay, so are we ready to move into roll call then on the main motion for approval of now, the amended motion would be for approval of residential two-family on the two parcels? Okay. Let's call roll, please.
Okay. Baker.
Aye.
Todd Byrather.
Aye.
John Dietzman.
Aye.
Greg Francis.
Aye.
Diana Painter.
Aye.
Thomas Anderson.
Aye.
Sylvia St. Clair.
Abstain.
Clifford Winger.
Aye.
Joanne Wright.
Nay.
Okay, motion carries.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, everyone. I think that was a thoughtful discussion, so I appreciate everyone's input on that. Okay, I think we're closed on that, right?
Plan Commission President, if I could ask a question or just a quick
Please.
note. So we will draw up, because normally we do findings. We'll draw up a memo like what's done, if you're okay with that, what was done 5 years ago for your signature, listing the vote record and giving your recommendation to City Council.
How does that get presented to council? The original, because they haven't taken action on the rest of the recommendation yet.
No, they have not. They're waiting for your answer, and so we will once we have it signed by you, we will upload it to council as part of the agenda packet, just like your findings. It just goes into the record that way, and then we'll present to council on Monday.
So the current recommendation is still the office change on the west side of Regal, and then now the new recommendation, the amended recommendation for.
Yeah, the input will be that Plan Commission voted to recommend approval of the east parcels for RTF, or for residential 10 to 20, land use RTF zoning.
Okay.
And once you sign, we'll transmit to council.
Okay, I'll look for that tomorrow. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Hume. And we'll close that out. Okay.
We'll move on to the next hearing item.
Yeah, so we obviously are over. So receivership code text amendment with Mr. Ruffing, please.
Good evening, council members. Thank you for having me. My name is Jason Ruffing. I am from the city of Spokane. I'm in code enforcement, one of the supervisors in code enforcement. And I'm here to discuss a city-sponsored proposal for a code text amendment to Title 17F. And this is specifically regarding formalizing receivership, which is a superior court process, as an alternative to city administrative demolition orders. I do have a presentation that I can go through briefly, and I will, of course, be available for questions or discussions. And did that show up for everybody?
Yes.
Okay, great. So again, this is a city-sponsored code amendment proposal. The specific sections that this is involving is 17F 070470 and 17F 070490. And this really just formalizes an alternative to city demolition orders. These are administrative orders that are carried out through the building official process for substandard, abandoned, unfit, and nuisance properties. And I want to stress that first word, formalizes. This process, the referral process of distressed properties from our code enforcement processes to superior court process, that relationship is already there. It already happens. This proposal just formalizes that handoff where the building official can specifically say, you know, we've exhausted all administrative remedies here. This needs to escalate to superior court. As I said, this would be implemented through the building official process. These are administrative hearings before the building official, which is Dermot Murphy. We focus on basically unsafe buildings, and our hope is to spend less time carrying out demolitions of these properties and shorten the time that these structures and then ultimately vacant lots sit in an unused capacity. And so the hope is to speed up the process towards rehabilitation and reuse of these properties. This is a photo of an example of the type of properties that we're typically talking about. This was a foreclosure property. The property owner had passed away. It was fire damaged. The city spent a lot of time and administrative resources taking this property through hearings. Because it was an abandoned property, there was no real response, and the mortgage company didn't have a great path towards rehabilitation because they weren't the owner. So ultimately, the building official ordered a demolition. The city carried out this demolition, and now this property is a vacant lot that is encumbered with a demolition lien. And the hope with establishing an alternative is we could move this property to superior court. The court could order a receiver to be appointed as the person in responsible charge of this property, and they could pursue different paths, such as sale, such as a private demolition rather than a demolition paid for by the taxpayers. Just a brief estimate of a timeline for this type of case, which is challenging, but I'll attempt it. In code enforcement, we try to prevent these things from becoming blighted properties, nuisance properties. It's like a preventative approach. We send notices. We try and connect these property owners with services. When that fails, we escalate to administrative remedies. And in the case of substandard buildings, that is a administrative hearing process before the building official. Those hearings happen roughly every 6 months for each property, but they can happen in shorter intervals. And then there, of course, is the appeal process for administrative orders through the hearing examiner. So all of our due process would remain in place, and we'd walk through this escalation for properties where it's appropriate. And then a receivership process timeline. This was given to me with the help of our legal department because I'm not very familiar with the steps that they take. But they would take our investigation, whether it's code enforcement or the police department, which currently provides receivership cases to city legal. And then they would prepare a case. It might take a month. They would send out notice requirements pursuant to Superior Court guidelines. And then once a receiver is appointed, if a receiver is appointed, they can take whatever actions they deem appropriate. And that timeline could be very unique for each property once the receiver is appointed as well. Again, each property is different. It's hard to say each one of these properties will be sold and rehabbed and occupied again within 6 months. That's not reasonable for each property. Specific conditions may change what we can do with each property. The proposal doesn't change any of our administrative processes regarding notice requirements, appeals that can be heard, and we still want to focus on voluntary compliance with all these properties, but the reality is with a lot of abandoned properties, there is no voluntary compliance. And the only way to move some of these properties is through city action. Brief overview of the timeline. This was originally briefed back before the pandemic, and it got sidetracked due to other priorities, but it has since been resumed. There have been a couple of workshops, most recently on November 11th, updated the project page with more dates. We've provided all the appropriate notice information for the Gazette and the Spokesman Review. I sent this information out again through ProChamps, which is our foreclosure registry. So all of our mortgage property preservation contacts received notice of this proposal. I still have yet to receive any comments about this, either from mortgage professionals or the general public from previous meetings, other than the discussion at the workshops and at the Community Assembly Land Use Committee. Today is the hearing, and after this, pending the decision here, will just be a return to the City Council for that process. I will turn my screen off, and I am available for any questions or any comments.
Hey, thank you.
Oh, and I was going to mention too, I have the actual code language pulled up, and I'd be happy to share that if everyone wanted to see that again. It was provided in the packet as well, though.
It could be great to put it on the screen while we're talking. Yeah. Anyone have any questions for Mr. Ruffin before we would take testimony on this?
I do.
Okay, Greg, Mr. Francis.
Jason, I just want to confirm, while I think I have this, I just want to confirm that this doesn't do anything that would take away from the rights of existing property owners. This would just provide an alternative in the case of derelict properties. Can you confirm that, Jason?
There we go. Couldn't find the unmute button. I'm sorry. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that. Correct. So the due process does not change in any way for these properties. And in reality, we actually extend and expand due process for these types of properties because we're no longer, we're not in every case acting just from the building official's orders. We're actually further escalating this to Superior Court. So in effect, we are expanding due process for these properties, giving another opportunity for testimony. We're providing another appeals process, more opportunities for compliance because there would be some additional time in between the building official order and the Superior Court date. So you're correct to say it doesn't reduce any of the due process. We actually expand it and provide more opportunities for these types of properties en route to hopefully having less time where they're sitting unused.
Thank you.
And so I'll just scroll through this briefly. This is the first code section, so 470. This lists out basically opportunities for compliance with a specific building official order. And it also gives some criteria for when the building official can issue a demolition order. So they're somewhat typical if you're familiar with this type of enforcement. If it's a long time boarded up property, if it's unsafe to where it's hazardous to occupants, the building official can recommend eminent domain processes, which we've never pursued here. And then I've added a subsection here just listing out that as an alternative to those demolition criteria, that we could pursue receivership. So that is the first change is that underlined section. The second change is here. And again, just because it lists demolition, I also added or receivership to that section. And then the other code is essentially the exact same phrase, but just in a different section of code for city enforcement of the building official. So this is the situation that we discussed earlier where, you know, it's an abandoned property or a vacant property with an out-of-town landlord and they've abandoned the property and it's become derelict. When an owner has failed to complete some sort of corrective action, here are the steps the building official can order. And so I added an alternative to demolition here as well. And it's the same phrase as the other code section.
If I could?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Mr. Ruffin, I have a question about the receiver himself or themselves. I believe last time you gave a presentation, you said that we have a relationship, or the city already has a relationship with somebody that's being used as the receiver. Explain. I know it really has nothing to do with adding the language to the code, but can you just explain to me more about the process of finding a receiver, what their parameters are, if there's a search for more than one?
Yeah, so those are all good questions. And to some extent, they're a little bit unknown at this point. I can explain the current city's process. But, you know, if for whatever reason we had an abundance of these properties to push through, it could be that the one receiver that we've worked with in the past couldn't handle all of them. That is a potential. Ultimately, what happens is the court, so the Superior Court appoints a receiver. It's not necessarily it's not a city staff person. It's not like there's specific qualifications that is needed to be appointed as a receiver. It's similar to if you're familiar with the guardian process, when somebody is declared to be incapable of acting in their best interest, a court can appoint a guardian for the person. A receiver is similar to that, but for a property. And so back to our current process, the Spokane Police neighborhood resource officers investigate chronic nuisance properties, mostly related to drug activity, property crime, all sorts of things. And when they can tie this type of activity to specific properties, they can go down an enforcement path called a chronic nuisance enforcement process, and they'll declare a property a chronic nuisance. When those owners do not mitigate those nuisance conditions of the property, whatever they may be, they can then pursue a court case for a receiver to be appointed. That goes through the civil enforcement unit of the police department. A city attorney prepares that case and takes it to court. and they work with an unaffiliated third party that is also an attorney, and he is the receiver that's been appointed historically. And so my assumption would be because we're still working with our same city attorneys, that relationship is still there for our current receiver that has handled these properties in the past. But there's nothing to say that it couldn't be a different person, and each property could ultimately have a specific condition that would make a specific receiver more appropriate. It would just be up to the judge in each case.
So to follow up on that, if I may, are there any particular guidelines that receive to be following, or is it sort of an ad hoc situation?
Yeah. So again, I'm not an attorney, but my assumption is they're acting in the best interest of the property. So, let's say their two options are donate the property to a buddy or list the property for sale and get the highest and best market value for that property. They couldn't take the worst option because the court wouldn't approve the action because it wouldn't be the best use of the property.
So I've got to go through the court for approval is what you're saying.
Yeah. And there's also, I want to say it was the last workshop, I brought up the specific case of those relocated houses in West Central. Mm-hmm. There are also other conditions where the court other situations where the court can place specific conditions that the receiver has to follow if there's some other interest in place, such as historical properties, if it's an opportunity for multifamily developments, low-income areas, all those sorts of things could be potential criteria that receivership has to try and prioritize, that the receiver has to try and prioritize. But ultimately, they have to act in the best interest of the property and also try and maximize potential sale prices and all those types of things. And then that is distributed to mortgage companies, family members in the event of a deceased owner. So they do, in a way, act as a fiduciary, and they also have to act in the best interest of the property in a way that it can be approved by the court.
That's great. Thank you so much. I appreciate that answer, all of them. Thank you.
Agreed. Okay. Any other questions, or we can go to public testimony if there is any? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Ruffin. Jackie, I don't think we have any, do we? Do we have anyone on the line?
I do not think that we have anybody.
Is anyone on the line from the public that would like to testify on this matter? Okay, I don't see any that. Okay.
Are we ready for a motion?
Well, hold on. With that, we'll close the record, and now we're ready for a motion.
Okay, I'd like to move that the Planning Commission recommend that City Council approve changes to SMC 17F.070.470 and 17F.070.490 to include receivership as an option as written and presented.
I second.
Give that to Sylvia. So moved by Commissioner Francis and seconded by Commissioner St. Clair. Okay, deliberation, any discussion?
My only comment is I'm surprised this wasn't an option previously. It's really unfortunate that, basically you got to the point where you just had to demolish the building. And so I'm happy to support this because I think it's an important addition to potentially preserve our housing. And if that's not possible, to at least reduce the cost of the transfer of property to someone that can develop it.
Agreed, and thank you. That, man, this was educational. This is complicated, but I do get it now, and also I better understand, I don't know if it's the decision-making authority, but having that additional option is I can see it important. So thank you.
If I could,
please.
I'd like to say I'm really excited that this is another tool that's added to the options for our housing situation. but also for our labor situation. I see a lot of these properties as being an opportunity to expand on some of our maybe apprenticeship programs. And I think it's a great start to something that I hope would expand in many different ways. So I'm going to support this. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Okay, any other commissioners? Okay. I think we're ready for roll, please.
Okay, Michael Baker.
Aye.
Todd Bybrother. John Dietzman.
Aye.
Greg Francis.
Aye.
Diana Painter had to leave the meeting. Thomas Anderson.
Aye.
Sylvia St.
Aye.
Clifford Winger. Oh. I think
he just evaporated.
well, yep, he disappeared. All right. Oh, he's back now. Commissioner Winger, how do you vote? I don't think you can hear us yet. We'll come back to him. Joanne Wright? Okay, well, the motion will carry. Clifford Winger? What's your vote?
I don't see his mic yet.
No. I think he should be here.
Mr. Winger, you could use the chat function. We could record it that way, if that's going to work for you.
He should be unmuted as well.
Well, since it won't affect the recommendation, can we amend it later? I suppose not, huh?
Can't do that.
Times we live in.
Mr. Winger, are you there?
There we go.
There we go. Mr. Winger, can you unmute yourself and try to speak or use the chat function? Mr. Winger, I will chat to everybody asking Mr. Winger if he can I don't know if he's cutting in and out. Okay, Mr. Winger, I sent a chat to everybody. Hopefully everybody can see that. Seeing if Mr. Winger can reply back through the chat function. See headphones. He's working on it.
Yeah, I heard something.
Yes. I vote for Mr. Rothingston.
All right. Thank you.
Sorry.
2020. All right. Thank you. So Jackie, that's 8-0?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much. Okay, everyone. I think that issue is closed. Thank you, everyone, for that. Thank you for all the workshops on that's been a long haul, so that was helpful. Okay, so with that, before we adjourn, we know with certain this is Mr. Dietzman's last session. I guess, Mr. Baker, you're in limbo. Or your status, is that my understanding?
Yeah, I guess so.
So we'll just leave it there. So,
well, before everybody hops off, Mr. Baker, do you remember? I think you finished off somebody else's term, but were you only for like a year though, weren't you?
Yes.
Okay, I think you're going to be eligible. I want to go through and we'll pull exactly when you were confirmed, and I'll get back to you before the end of the week. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Thank you.
I would say
And you desire to continue for another term?
Yes.
Okay. We'll get back to you soon.
I would say if we can't figure it out here, then maybe we just roll into it. So
Yeah,
pretty sure I don't have that authority.
I want to say it's been great working with all of the people, and I'm going to miss you. It's been a nice ride.
Thanks,
Thank you,
John.
John, we really appreciate what you've done as far as the traffic.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, John. You've been greatly appreciated.
Thank you.
Okay, good.
Thank you, John.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Happy
With that,
holidays.
Happy holidays. We're adjourned.
Thanks, everybody.
Holidays. Bye-bye.